right, today we are continuing with another section of Chapter 2, and we will be talking about 4 new theorems today and then doing some proofs, practicing how to use them. So first, let's just talk about this scenario here. In this diagram, I have these 3 angles, and I'm told angle 1 is supplementary to angle 2. Remember, that means that angle 1 plus angle 2 is 180 degrees. Angle 2 is also supplementary to angle A. How large is angle 1? How large is angle 2? So let's take a look. The only one I'm given the measure of off the bat is angle A, which is 70. So the relationship I have from A elsewhere is that angle A is supplementary to angle 2. So the way I can find angle 2 is by subtracting 70 from 180, and I get 110. So that's 110 degrees. Now I want to find angle 1. Well, I'm told angle 1 is supplementary to angle 2 as well, so that means that angle 1 is going to be 180 minus 110, which gives me 70. So what do I know now? Well, I know that angle A is congruent to angle 1, and angle A and angle 1 were both supplementary to angle 2. What this just showed is this theorem here. If angles are supplementary to the same angle, then they are congruent. Let's look at a second scenario. Here I have these 4 angles. Angle F is supplementary to angle G. Again, that means that they add to 180. Angle H is supplementary to angle J, and angle G is congruent to angle J. What is the relationship between angle F and angle H? Well, let's give angle G and J any kind of measure. You can pick whichever you want. I'm just going to go with 15 degrees. And they're congruent, which means they are both 15. Okay. Angle F is supplementary to angle G. That means that angle F is going to be 180 minus 15, which is 165 degrees. Okay. Angle H is supplementary to angle J, so that means angle H is going to be 180 minus 15, which is 165. So what do I know now? Well, between angle H and angle F, they are congruent, and they were supplementary to congruent angles. So that has proven this next theorem. If angles are supplementary to congruent angles, then they are congruent. We have the same theorems that apply to complementary angles as well. If angles are complementary to the same angle, then they are congruent. And if angles are complementary to congruent angles, then they are congruent. So we've got 4 new theorems here. And the first step is going to be just to know when you would apply each one. So first of all, whether it's complementary or supplementary, that's going to take out 2 of your options, okay? So if it's complementary, you know you can eliminate the supplementary options, and if you're dealing with supplementary, you can eliminate the complementary options. Between your 2 left, what you're wanting to look at is how many angles you're dealing with here. Notice on this first scenario we looked at, we had 3 angles. So if you're talking about angles are supplementary to the same angles, then they are congruent. That would be when 3 angles are involved. On the next one, if angles are supplementary to congruent angles, then they are congruent. That is when I have 4 angles involved. So similarly for my complementary theorems, if angles are complementary to the same angle, they're congruent. That is when 3 angles will be involved. And if angles are complementary to congruent angles, they are congruent. That's when 4 angles will be involved. So these are the 4 theorems. And what we're going to do before we get straight into some proofs is just practice how to know when you're using which of the 4. So off the bat, first, there is a slight typo here on number 1. We want to change this second angle in that sentence to be angle XWY. So angle X is complementary to angle XWY. So these 2 angles are complementary. And then we're also told that angle Z is complementary to angle YWZ. So those 2 angles are complementary. And then we're told that angle XWY is congruent to angle YWZ. So of the 4 that we just talked about, I can eliminate 2 of them because this one has to do with complementary angles. So I'm not going to use anything to do with supplementary. So it's complementary, and I need to look at how many angles were involved here. Well, this was 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that is going to lead me to the very last one. If angles are complementary to congruent angles, then they are congruent. Okay. Moving on to the next one, number 2. Given angle 1 is supplementary to angle 2, angle 3 is supplementary to angle 4, and angle 1 is congruent to angle 3, where do I go from here to show that angle 2 is congruent to angle 4? Well, this time I'm dealing with supplementary, so I know I can eliminate the complementary options. And again, I am dealing with 4 angles, so that is going to be the second one we talked about on the front page. If angles are supplementary to congruent angles, then they are congruent. Okay, on to number 3. Angle 1 is complementary to angle 2. Angle 2 is complementary to angle 3. If I want to prove angle 1 is congruent to angle 3, which of the 2 complementary ones will I use? Well, I'm just using 3 angles, so that is going to be the third one we talked about. If angles are complementary to the same angle, then they are congruent. All right, on number 4, angle 1 is supplementary to angle 2. Angle 1 is also supplementary to angle 3. How would I know angle 2 and angle 3 are congruent to each other? Well, again, supplementary means it's just going to be one of those two. And I'm only dealing with 3 angles, so that is going to be the very first one we talked about. If angles are supplementary to the same angle, then they are congruent. All right, let's practice some actual proofs now. This one also, slight typo. Instead of saying angle 3, I want this to say angle 1 is congruent to angle 4. So I've got the diagram, and I am told that angle 1 is congruent to angle 4. So in the end, what I'm wanting to show is that angle 2 is congruent to angle 3. So let's start first by just listing our given informations and numbering our statements and reasons so we know what goes together. Given 2, angle 1 is congruent to angle 4, and that is given. So the diagram is going to help me in proceeding with the next step. So I need to look at the diagram and see what I can assume from the diagram. Well, when I look here, I see that angles 1 and 2 are forming a straight angle, and angles 3 and 4 are also forming a straight angle. Well, I know if 2 angles form a straight angle, that means that they are supplementary. So I'm going to say that angle 1 is supplementary to angle 2. And how do I know that? Again, if you don't know that off the top of your head, this is where you would consult your dominoes. And so on the second page here in my dominoes, if 2 angles form a straight angle, then they are supplementary. Okay, so I know those 2 are supplementary, and then we can say the same thing about angles 3 and 4. Angle 3 is supplementary to angle 4, and my reason is going to be the same as number 3. If 2 angles form a straight angle, then they are supplementary. So what I have now shown is that I've got 2 sets of supplementary angles. One of those 2 is a congruent pair. So my final conclusion that angle 2 is congruent to angle 3 is now going to be written. And my if-then reason, again, it's supplementary and I'm dealing with 4 angles. So if angles are supplementary to congruent angles, then they are congruent. Okay, moving on. Angle F is supplementary to angle FGJ. Angle H is supplementary to angle HGJ. Okay, and then GJ bisects angle FGH. So I'm going to again get started with listing my givens. So my first two givens, I can't draw any conclusions after that, but my last one, that GJ bisects angle FGH, well, what that means is it's dividing it into two congruent angles. So I can conclude that angle FGJ is congruent to angle JGH, and my reason, again, if you don't remember off the top of your head, you can look in your dominoes where we bisect an angle. If a ray bisects an angle, then it divides it into two congruent angles. I'm going to pause while I write that. You need to pause to get that down. That's perfectly fine. But what we now have is a pair of congruent angles, two pairs of supplementary angles. So this is going to be my supplementary theorem that involves four angles to say that angle F is congruent to angle H, because if angles are supplementary to congruent angles, then they are congruent. And there is that last statement. Pause if you need to take more time to write it, but the video only gives me 15 minutes to record. So on to the next one. Again, I am going to get started listing my given information. I've got that line OA is perpendicular to line OC. Now, what does that tell me? If OA is perpendicular to OC, that means I'm going to have a right angle at angle AOC. And how do I know that? Again, if you don't recall, consult your dominoes, but if lines are perpendicular, then they intersect at right angles, or then they form right angles. Okay, so what do I then know about angles 1 and 2? If they are forming a right angle, that means that angle 1 is complementary to angle 2. And I know that because if angles form a right angle, then they are complementary. So that was only one of my pieces of given information. I had one more. I also know that OB is perpendicular to OD. That was given. So similarly, that is going to mean that the resulting angle BOD is a right angle. And how do I know that? That is going to be the same as number 2. So what that means there then is that angle 2 is complementary to angle 3, and that reason is going to be same as number 3. If two angles form a right angle, then they are complementary. So what I have here now is two sets of complementary angles, and only 3 angles were involved. So angle 1 is congruent to angle 3 because if angles are complementary to the same angle, then they are congruent. And my time is going to cut off, so I'm going to complete that last proof in a separate part.